Welcome to my garden, to the GinGee GoodEarth show. This is an evening program. GinGee GoodEarth, production, Roman numeral 8, part 18, director GinGee GoodEarth. Today's date is July 21st, an hour away from midnight, the 22nd of July, 2020. I fixed the picture show in the last production. My picture show slideshow wasn't working, but hopefully it's going to work this time. And this is an evening show, and I'm mainly going to read and focus on a universal history of the United States of America, where we left off today. And I want to go ahead and read a quick recipe from the Modern Method of Preparing Delightful Foods by Ida Allen. And this is exciting. There's a picture in here of a husking bee, where everybody, including all the neighborhood colonists community, is at the husking bee. And this is where everybody's peeling the corn. You know, they're removing the husk from the corn so that they can have a good supply of ear of corn. And it's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's called the husking bee. So let's see, I'm going to get a brighter light. So this is more of a night show because I don't have all the time in my day to do this type of programming, but I want to participate in helping to educate on the history of the United States and honor our veterans and our citizens of America. And I love America, and I like talking about it. I can say the United States of America at least 50 times per show because I love our country. I love our freedoms, our liberties, and I love the people. And if I can help educate, then I will so do that. So, this is fun. This little horse makes me smile. I love horses. Yes, I love horses, and I'm a horse show judge, and it's something I want to get more involved with. I'm a grandmother, so I can only do so many things. Right now I'm just getting my supplies ready. But we'll pick out a recipe out of the book, but I'm going to get a better flashlight. So there you go. Here's the husking bee of the settlers, or farm agricultural people, sitting around, and they're removing the husk from the corn to prepare it for supper. And the book is called The Modern Method of Preparing Delightful Foods by Ida Allen, and a beautiful first American woman on the cover. Very nice. I don't know if you get that. So, and again, there's no script that I follow. The basic objective of this wonderful show is to educate, have fun, entertain, enjoy the blue hydrangeas, and I have the purple iris, and then I have a lot of international dolls. So welcome. This is a late night program, and I have a wonderful picture show. So I'm going to focus in on the picture show because you'll be focusing on that too while I'm doing the reading, however you want to listen. but we're going to get a recipe now out of this book. And it looks like I turned the page and here I am, SalmonBisque. And this includes mazola oil and Cairo syrup because they're made out of corn. So these are old-fashioned recipes. So you can modify them as you like. And there's Joe Pye weed, and you know I talk a lot about Joe Pye weed. Okay, SalmonBisque, 1 1/2 cups flaked, fresh, cooked, or canned salmon, 1 small green pepper ground, 1 tablespoon onion ground, 1 teaspoon parsley minced, 1 pint water, 1 1/2 cups pint milk, 1 cup canned tomato strained, 1/2 cup a tablespoon of Cairo, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1/8 teaspoon of pepper, 2 tablespoons of mazola, 2 tablespoons of Argo or Kingsford cornstarch. Combine salmon, tomato, pepper, onion, water, and parsley. Simmer 15 minutes. Add 1/8 teaspoon baking powder, thicken with cornstarch and mazola blended. Add the Cairo and seasonings and thin with the milk. And then you have your SalmonBisque soup. Bon appetit! Okay, so now we're going to read as far as we can go until my camera shuts off. So sometimes that's why the camera shuts off abruptly at the end and I don't have any time to fix it. And I'll tell you what, I'm really thirsty. It was 95 degrees today. And I'm going to have some organic strawberry bottled juice, which should be pretty good. I'm just looking for the... Where is the can opener? There it is. So this is what I'm having, a delicious, delicious strawberry drink. It's organic strawberry. So you'll hear the pop. There you go. It boiled over. Oh my gosh. I have to, it's very fizzy. Well, I guess we have to keep the show going. On with the show. On with the show. Okay. So let's keep rolling. Look at the fizzle. Look at the fizz on that top. Organic strawberry. See the strawberry? So that's what I'm going to enjoy. I really need it. Crunch my thirst. It was a really hard day today. But it was an exciting day. I reached 2,000 viewers, and I'm hoping to get into the thousands, but this is not an easy venture. So, I gotta put my drink over here. I just have to kind of warm up to this a little bit. I don't know if you can see the bubbles. If I blow some kind of festive bubbles here. I gotta get psyched up to read. Okay, I'm getting prepared to read. Okay, so we're on page. I have to wear a head. I'm going to be wearing a head thing, a headlight. Okay, it's the only way I'm going to be able to do it. Everybody's sleeping. That's why I have to be so quiet. A lot of my family members are construction workers. They're in bed by 9 o'clock. So I'm not allowed to make noise. Okay, so we're on page 110. I don't like it when I don't remember where I left off. But I had to leave off. Oh yeah, called Williams Rock. So Colonel Williams' party, which left the camp between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning of September 8th, 1755, very unexpectedly fell in with the army of Baron Drosco. And then we talked about it was on the cast side of the road near where Colonel Williams fell, and I am informed is to this day called Williams Rock. Just by the present road and in the midst of the battlegrounds is a circular pond. And then we talked about the pond, the French Mountain and the Bloody Pond. And there they constructed at the head of the lake and called it Fort William Henry. So now we're going to begin. Early in the spring, 1756, the enemy, invited by the success of the preceding year, made another interruption. Okay, early in the spring, 1756, the enemy, invited by the success of the preceding year, made another eruption into the inhabited country, and did great mischief. The number of troops on the regular establishment was totally insufficient for the protection of the frontier. The Indians, divided into small parties, concealed themselves with so much dexterity as seldom to be perceived until the blow was struck. These murders were frequently committed in the very neighborhood of the forts, and the detachments which were employed in scouring the country were generally eluded or attacked to advantage. In one of these skirmishes, in the neighborhood of a stockade, the Americans were totally routed and Captain Mercer killed. The smaller forts were frequently assaulted and attacked. The people either abandoned the country or attempted to secure themselves in a small stockades, where they were in great distress for provisions, arms, and ammunition. Lord London arrived in America in July 1756 as Commander-in-Chief. He was clothed with the highest civil authority, having been appointed governor of the colony. A complimentary address from the regiment stating their pleasure at the arrival and appointment and the readiness with which they would execute his commands was presented to him. Also a statement of the distress of the colony, and a particular description of the situation of the military points. An army was raised of about 12,000 men, which was better prepared for the field than any army that had been assembled in America. But the change of commanders delayed the operations of the English army. The French were active, and on the 12th of July, General Abercrombie received intelligence that they meditated an attack upon Oswego, and post the utmost importance. General Webb was ordered to prepare a march with a regiment to support the defense of that place. but was detained until the 12th of August. A month later, before he had proceeded far, he learned it was too late. By the loss of Oswego, all the western country was laid open to the ravages. There was reason to fear that the frontier posts would be swept away, one after another, and that all the preparations which had been made for an early attack on the enemy would be lost with them. Besides, the enemy would have another year to fortify and strengthen their posts, and to render the reduction of them much more hazardous and difficult. The colonies were obliged to submit, and Lord London sailed from New York for Halifax with 6,000 land forces, and there made a junction with Holborn and Hoopson. Loudon, not London, Lord Loudon. He was now an army of 12,000 men, exclusive of officers, aided by a powerful fleet, but they were so dilatory in their measures that before they were ready to sail, the Brist fleet with 17 sail of the line, besides frigates and transports, arrived at Louisbourg. The garrison was so reinforced as to amount to 9,000 men. On the reception of this intelligence, it was judged inexpedient to proceed, and the expedition was given up. Had the Earl of Loudon been a man of enterprise, had he wished to distinguish himself in his Majesty's service, or to have rendered himself popular in the colonies, he might have conducted this powerful army to Ticonderoga, and carried all before him in that quarter. At least he might have sent a large detachments for the defense of the frontiers. With his Prussian Majesty, an Amherst or a Wolfe, these would have been but natural and common achievements, but he returned leisurely to New York and effected nothing. The British generals in America did more in 2 years by the pusillanimity of weakness and inconsistency of their counsels to injure the colonies, and the French could have done with all their forces. The provincials would probably have advanced to Crown Point the last year, and made themselves masters of the country south of Lake Champlain. They would undoubtedly have kept their own posts and prevented the exiles which followed. The British generals and officers not only lost Oswego, but they destroyed the fortifications at the Great Carrying Place and filled Wood Creek with logs and trees. They cut off all the communication between the colonies and the Five Nations. The only body of Indians which preserved the appearance of friendship to them, they abandoned their whole country to the mercy of the enemy. Nothing could be done to prevent their collecting the Indians from all quarters to act against the colonies. Monsieur Montcalm did not neglect to improve the advantages he had gained, and which the conduct of the British generals afforded him. Finding that the troops were drawn off to Halifax, and the destruction of the vessels, boats, and batteaux at the south landing of the Lake George, Bodies of Indians with his whole force were collected for this purpose. Colonel Monroe, who commanded at Fort William Henry, having intelligence that an advanced party of the enemy lay at Ticonderoga, detached Colonel Parker with 400 men to surprise them. Having landed at night not far distant from the enemy, he sent 3 boats to reconnoiter, directing them where to meet him in a general rendezvous. The enemy was laying and intercepting the boats, obtained a perfect knowledge of the colonel's designs, and concerted measures to decoy him into their hands. They laid an ambush behind the point where they knew he designed to land, and having been reinforced to nearly double his numbers, they sent 3 boats to the place appointed for the general rendezvous. The colonel, mistaking them for his own boats, eagerly put to shore and was instantly surrounded by the enemy. They attacked him on all sides in such insistent violence, the severity. 70 pirates and 2 officers only made their escape. Elated with the success, Monsieur Montcalm hastened to the siege of Fort William Henry, having drawn together all his forces from Crown Point, Ticonderoga, and an adjacent post with greater number of Indians than the French had ever employed on any other occasion. He passed the lake and regularly invested the fort. The whole army consisted of nearly 8,000 men. The garrison consisted of about 3,000, and the fortifications were said to be good. At Fort Edward, scarcely 14 miles distant, lay General Webb with 4,000 troops. The regular troops at the 2 posts were probably more than equal to the regular force of the enemy. A considerable proportion of their army consisted of Canadians and Indians, yet in about 6 days was this important post delivered up into the hands of the enemy. All the vessels, boats, battleships, at which so much expense and labor had been for 2 years preparing, fell into the power of the enemy. Through General Webb had timely notice of the approach of the enemy, yet he never sent to an alarm the country and bring on the militia. He never reinforced the garrison, nor made a single motion for its relief. So far was he from this, that he sent a letter to Colonel Monroe, who commanded the fort, advising him to give it up to the enemy. Montcalm intercepted the letter and sent it into the fort to the colonel. He had acted the part of a soldier and made a brave defense, but having burst a number of his cannon, expended a considerable part of his ammunition, and perceiving that he was to have no relief from General Webb, he capitulated on terms honorable for himself and the garrison. It was to march out with arms, baggage, and 1 piece of cannon, in honor to Colonel Monroe for the brave defense he had made. The troops were not to serve against the most Christian king under 18 months, unless exchanged for an equal number of French prisoners. The French and Indians paid no regard to the articles of capitulation, but falling on the French, stripped them of their baggage and the few remaining effects, and the Indians in the English service were dragged from the ranks, tomahawked and scalped. Men and women had their throats cut, their bodies ripped open, and their bowels with insult thrown in their faces. Infants and children were barbarously taken by their heels and their brains dashed out against the stones and trees. The Indians pursued the English nearly half the way to Fort Edward, where the greatest number of them arrived in a most forlorn condition. It seems astonishing that between the 2,000 and 3,000 troops with arms in their hands should, contrary to the most express stipulations, suffer these intolerable insults. When it was too late, General Webb alarmed the country and put the colonies to great expense in sending on large detachments of the militia for the defense of the northern frontier. The sudden capture of the fort, the massacre made by the enemy's Indians, and suspicions of General Webb's treachery, and an apprehension that General Montcalm would force his way to Albany, put the country into a state of great alarm and consternation. People were never more alarmed during the war. At the same time, there was never a more general and manly exertion. Connecticut detached and sent on in a few days about 5,000 men. She had raised and sent into the field 1,400 before, which was more than her proportions. Large reinforcements were marched on to Albany and Fort Edward from New York and other colonies. General Webb, notwithstanding the great numbers of men with which he was reinforced, did not make any effectual provision for the defense of the frontier settlements. No sooner was one expedition finished by the enemy than another was undertaken. Soon after the reduction of Fort William Henry, the enemy, with fire and sword, laid waste the fine settlement, the German Flats, and on the Mohawk River. On the American station there were nearly 20,000 regular troops and a large number of provincials in service, and yet one fortress and the settlement after another were swept away, and everywhere the enemy rioted and trumpeted with impunity. The army spent the remainder of the campaign in activity. The provincials, as the season for winter quarters approached, returned to their respective colonies. The regular troops were stationed at Albany and Fort Edward, thus ending the inglorious campaign of 1757. By that time, under the repeated losses they had sustained, the colonies had very much lost their confidence in the British commanders in America. They, for 2 years, had witnessed their dilatory measures, their inconsistency, want of foresight, and a spirit of enterprise, and had such bitter experience of the consequences that they considered them as utterly disqualified for the important command which they held. To their incapacity and pusillanimity wholly did they impute the loss of Oswego, Fort William Henry, and their other losses on the frontier. Notwithstanding all the reinforcements which France had sent to Canada, they, every campaign and a force much superior to the enemy, Had they been men of military genius, skill, and enterprise, instead of the losses they sustained, they might have led on their troops to conquest and glory. Had the colonies been left to themselves, they would probably have done better. The first year of the war was left to themselves. Their achievements were honorable and useful to the nation, but now they had sustained 2 years of great expense, which had been worse than lost. Indeed, such were the ministry and the men whom they employed, that misfortune and disaster attended them in almost every quarter of the globe. A British historian observes, with respect to this third campaign in America, that it ended to the eternal disgrace of those who then commanded the armies and directed the councils of Great Britain. By this time the disputes relative to the Ohio, Crown Point, and territory in America had involved a great part of Europe in the flames of war. It had kindled in both the Indies and extended its destructive influence beyond the Ganges. The disappointments and losses of the British nation for a succession of years and its present exigencies absolutely demanded a change of men and measures. Men of capacity and enterprise were necessary to retrieve its honor and prevent its ruin. And there you go. That's our solution to America. We've had such great disappointments since 1972 and losses of American nation commerce for a succession of years, and its present exigencies absolutely demanded a change of congressmen and senate, and measures need to be taken to regain and reestablish America. We need men of capacity and enterprise were necessary to retrieve its honor and prevent its ruin, because our past senior leadership is the ruination of America since 1972. Notwithstanding the disappointments and losses of the past years, they determined on the reduction of Louisbourg, with a view of cutting off the communication between France and Canada, of destroying the French fishery, and of securing the trade with fisheries of Great Britain and her colonies to Americas, at the same time to gratify the colonies and to draw forth their whole strength into exertion. They also determined an expeditions against Crown Point and Fort Duquesne, which is Pittsuburgh. And let me take a break. You can watch the picture show. America needs restored. That's the word I was trying to look for. And then the 3Ds are debility, deprivation, and dread. Those are the new 3Ds. The old 3Ds were disease, disability, and death. But because of the pandemic 2020, we're looking at debility, deprivation, and dread, because there is no cure for this COVID-19. There is no miracle, because those that are infected are going to have debilitating deprivation problems the rest of their life. And that's a huge number of people. And they're going to have to be cared for. And it's another nightmare. Notwithstanding the disappointments and losses of the past years, they determined on the reduction of Louisbourg, with a view of cutting off the communication between France and Canada, of destroying the French fisheries, and of securing the trade and fisheries of Great Britain and her colonies in America. At the same time, to gratify the colonies and to draw forth their whole strength in exertion, they also determined on expeditions against Crown Point and Fort Duquesne. In intimidations of His Majesty's design and of this expectations from the colonies were at an early period given to them by letters from the Right Honorable Mr. Pitt. These were written in a style which animated their courage and drew forth their most spiritual exertions. The people of Connecticut, in particular, exerted themselves to an extraordinary manner. A special assembly was convened on the 8th of March at New Haven, when the Right Honorable Mr. Pitt letter was communicated in the legislature, importing that His Majesty had nothing more at heart than to repair the losses and disappointments of the last inactive and unhappy campaign, and by the most vigorous and extensive efforts to avert, by the blessings of God upon His arms, the dangers impending over North America, and not doubting but His faithful and brave subjects here would cheerfully cooperate with and second to the utmost the large expense and extraordinary succors supplied by His kingdom for their preservation and defense, and that His Majesty, judging that his colony, together with Massachusetts Bay, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, New York, and New Jersey, were able to furnish 20,000 men to join a body of the King's forces for invading Canada and carrying the war into the heart of the enemy's possessions, and that it was His Majesty's pleasure that, with all possible dispatch, there be raised as large a body of men as the number of inhabitants would allow, in to begin the operations of the campaign as soon as practicable, and that no encouragement might be wanting to so great and solitary an attempt, that strong recommendations would be made to Parliament to grant compensation for the expenses of said provisions, according as their active vigor and strenuous efforts should appear justly to merit. The legislature resolved that notwithstanding this colony, when acting with the several provinces aforesaid in the 3 several expeditions undertaken the preceding years against Crown Point, hath raised a much greater number of men than its just proportion, in comparison with what they then raised, by means of which the number of men is greatly diminished, and its strength much exhausted, yet that nothing be wanting on the part of this colony to promote the great and good design proposed by His Majesty, and relying on His royal encouragement, 5,000 good and effective men, including officers, shall be raised within this colony, as soon as may be for the service aforesaid. It was resolved at the same time that the assembly in sensible that it is really more than the number of men this colony can allow without great difficulty, and much exceeds this colony's proportion, even of 20,000 men, when compared with the other provinces. It was resolved that the said 5,000 men should be formed into 4 regiments, consisting of 12 companies in each regiment, that there should be 1 colonel, 1 lieutenant colonel, 1 major, and 1 chaplain to a regiment. The Honorable Phineas Layman, Esquire, who had general's command in 1755, Nathan Whiting, Esquire, Ephelit Dyer, Esquire, and John Reed, Esquire, were appointed colonels to command the respective regiments. The Reverend Monsieur George Beckwith, Joseph Fish, Benjamin Pomeroy, and Jonathan Ingersoll were appointed chaplains. To encourage the speedy enlistment of men for the service, the bounty was increased much beyond what it had been in former years. All proper measures were adopted to raise the troops with expedition, and to have them seasonably in the field. To provide for the expenses of such a number of troops, the Assembly enacted that 30,000 lawful money in bills of credit at 5%. Interest should be immediately printed, and that for a fund for the sinking of the said bills, a tax of 8 pence on the pound should be levied on the grand list of the colony, to be brought in Anna Domini 1760. It was provided, however, that such monies as should arrive from Great Britain for the reimbursement of the expenses of the war should be applied by the treasurer for the purpose of sinking the said bills, and that if a sufficient sum should arrive before the time fixed for the payment of said tax to sink the whole, that then said tax not be levied, and that the act respecting it should be null and void. Sounds like there's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, a hole. So what should I fix it with, dear Henry, dear Henry? Oh, what should I fix it with, dear Henry? With what? That the treasurer might be able to pay the troops on their return from the public service, the Assembly laid a tax of 9 pence on the pound on the whole rateable estate of the colony, according to the list brought into the Assembly in October last, and ordered that it should be collected by the last of December then following. And as it was uncertain whether money would arrive sufficient to reimburse the expenses of the colony, in season 5,000 pounds to be paid before the 20th of May, 1761, for ample fund to repay the sum to borrowed, a tax of 5 pence on the pound was levied on the list, which should be brought into the Assembly in 1759, to be paid into the Treasury by the last of December, 1760. It was enacted also that any of the notes given for the money borrowed might be received in payment of said tax, but as considerable sums of money were expected from England for provisions furnished for the troops under Lord Loudon of 1756, it was enacted that said money, as fast as it should arrive, should be applied to discharge the notes given for the money borrowed, and that it a sufficient sum should seasonably arrive and discharge all the notes, that then said tax should not be collected, that nothing might be left undone which could be. I have to check the timing on the video. Oh, let me read that sentence. In 1756, it was enacted that said money, as fast as it should arrive, should be applied to discharge the notes given for the money borrowed, and that if a sufficient sum should seasonably arrive to discharge all the notes, that then said tax should not be collected, that nothing might be left undone which could be attempted for His Majesty's service. The commissioners appointed in October to meet those from the other colonies were now authorized to meet them at Hartford on the 19th of April, or as near that time as might be, to consult on measures for the general safety, and to excite the several colonies to most vigorous and united exertions to carry His Majesty's designs into execution. The records of the colony for March 8, 1758. Each colonel was allowed 40 pounds for his table, and the decent support of his chaplain. Their wages as colonels and captains for one company were 15 pounds per month. The bounty for each man who would equip himself for the field was 4 pounds. The wages were the same as in the preceding year. As it is appeared by Mr. Pitt's letter that Major General Abercrombie was chief commander of the troops for the northern expedition. The governor was desired to give him the earliest information of the measures adopted by the colonies and their vigorous preparations for an early, successful campaign. So I'm going to stop there. So I'm on page 120, and we'll start with while the colonies were employing the most vigorous exertions for an early campaign, such effectual measures had been pursued in England that in February that armament designed for the reduction of Louisbourg was in readiness and sailed for America. Admiral Boscawen commanded the naval and General Amherst the land operations. Under General Amherst was Brigadier General Wolfe. These were men of singular characters. General Amherst and the coolness and abilities of the Roman Fabius, while General Wolfe possessed the magnanimity and fire of the Scipios. From such men great achievements might reasonably be expected, and their successes equaled the most sanguine expectations. Admiral Boscawen and General Amherst, with the armament under their command, arrived safely in America, and on the 28th of May, the whole fleet, consisting of 157 sailed with about 14,000 troops on board, took its departure from Halifax, and on the 2nd of June appeared before Louisbourg. For 6 days the landing of these troops was impracticable. The surf was so great that no boat could live near the shore. On every part of the coast where a landing was judged practicable, the enemy had made entrenchments, and in places most convenient for the purpose, they had erected batteries and mounted cannon. During the whole time after the discovery of the fleet until the landing of the troops, the enemy employed themselves in strengthening their lines. These were they manned with numerous infantry. General Amherst, with a number of his officers, reconnoitered the shore. I have to look up that word. On the 8th, the weather became more favorable. Through there was yet a great swell and surf. The general, determining not to lose moment, seized the opportunity. Before the break of day, the troops were embarked in 3 divisions. The admiral and general made their dispositions and consummate the judgment to distract the enemy and draw their attention to different parts. The dispositions were made in this manner. The divisions on the right and in the center were designed only for fence, F-E-I-N-T-S, while that on the left was appointed for the real attack. This was commanded by General Wolfe. Before the landing, 5 frigates and some other ships of war commenced a furious fire, not only on the center, but on the right and left of the enemy, to rake them in their flanks. When these had fired about 15 minutes, General Wolfe pressed to the shore. The enemy reserved his fire until the boats were nearly inshore, and then poured upon them the united blaze and thunder of their musketry and cannon. Many of the boats were overset, and others dashed in pieces. Some of the men were thrown, and others loped into the water, and while some were killed, others leaped into the water, and while some were killed, others drowned. The main body there much for Ticonderoga, but as the woods were thick and the guides unskillful, the troops were bewildered, and the columns, falling in one upon another, were entirely broken. In this confusion, Lord Howe, advancing at the head of the right center column, fell in with the advanced guard of the